Memory did not rewind gently. It pulled him back with a pressure behind the eyes, to the first apartment they shared, narrow and sunlit, where everything smelled new and temporary. They were young then, newly married, learning each other through habits rather than questions. He noticed her body only in fragments, the careful way she dressed, the long sleeves even in summer, the habit of turning away when changing clothes. None of it struck him as strange. He told himself love meant respect. Their intimacy arrived cautiously. Lights stayed off. Curtains were drawn even at night. She trembled when touched too suddenly, so he learned to move slowly, to ask permission without words. When she said no, he stopped. When she went still, he waited. He framed her distance as modesty, maybe trauma from a past she did not want to reopen. He never pressed. He was proud of that restraint. Marriage settled into routine quickly. Mornings were coffee and silence. Evenings were shared meals and television murmuring between them. She laughed softly, rarely loudly, as if joy required control. When he reached for her hand in public, she allowed it for a moment before slipping free. He interpreted this as shyness, a preference for privacy. Devotion, he believed, meant accepting the shape love chose to take. There were moments, small and fleeting, when confusion brushed against him. She avoided mirrors, covering them with towels in unfamiliar bathrooms. She declined medical checkups, claiming fear, expense, inconvenience. Once in bed, he felt a sudden rigidity in her body, not fear exactly, but vigilance. He apologized, though he did not know why. She kissed his cheek and said it was nothing. Her emotional fragility revealed itself in quiet ways. She startled easily at knocks on the door. She cried without explanation during ordinary conversations, then laughed moments later, embarrassed by her own tears. He became her anchor, or so he thought, the one steady thing she could rely on. The role pleased him. It gave purpose to the compromises he made without naming them as such. Trust filled the gaps where curiosity might have grown. He trusted her explanations, her silences, her insistence that some things were better left untouched. When friends joked about passion or children, she smiled thinly and changed the subject. He followed her lead. Their marriage did not look like others, but it felt intact, private, protected from outside judgment. At night, he memorized her breathing, the careful rhythm she maintained even in sleep. He told himself this was intimacy deeper than flesh. He did not question the body beside him because questioning felt like betrayal. Love to him was faith without proof, and for years that faith held. It formed the first rule of their life together: see only what is offered and nothing more. Looking back, he understood how easily silence became structure. Each unasked question hardened into habit, each compromise into expectation. Their love survived by narrowing, by defining safety through limitation. He mistook her vigilance for delicacy, her control for grace. What he did not see was how these patterns quietly governed them both. Boundaries turned into rules, unspoken but absolute, shaping where they went, whom they saw, and how closely he was allowed to look. By the time he noticed the walls, they already felt necessary. He believed this was marriage maturing. He did not yet realize it was something else entirely, something rehearsed, something enforced, something that would soon demand obedience rather than trust. The rules were forming, invisible, patient, and ready to reveal themselves once the past began pressing forward again.
Memory did not rewind gently. It pulled him back with pressure behind the eyes, to the first apartment they shared, narrow and sunlit, where everything smelled new and temporary. They were young then, newly married, learning each other through habits rather than questions. He noticed her body only in fragments, the careful way she dressed, the long sleeves even in summer, the habit of turning away when changing clothes. None of it struck him as strange. He told himself love meant respect. Their intimacy arrived cautiously. Lights stayed off. Curtains were drawn even at night. She trembled when touched too suddenly, so he learned to move slowly, to ask permission without words. When she said no, he stopped. When she went still, he waited. He framed her distance as modesty, maybe trauma from a past she did not want to reopen. He never pressed. He was proud of that restraint. Marriage settled into routine quickly. Mornings were coffee and silence. Evenings were shared meals and television murmuring between them. She laughed softly, rarely loudly, as if joy required control. When he reached for her hand in public, she allowed it for a moment before slipping free. He interpreted this as shyness, a preference for privacy. Devotion, he believed, meant accepting the shape love chose to take. There were moments, small and fleeting, when confusion brushed against him. She avoided mirrors, covering them with towels in unfamiliar bathrooms. She declined medical checkups, claiming fear, expense, inconvenience. Once in bed, he felt a sudden rigidity in her body. Not fear exactly, but vigilance. He apologized, though he did not know why. She kissed his cheek and said it was nothing. Her emotional fragility revealed itself in quiet ways. She startled easily at knocks on the door. She cried without explanation during ordinary conversations, then laughed moments later, embarrassed by her own tears. He became her anchor, or so he thought, the one steady thing she could rely on. The role pleased him. It gave purpose to the compromises he made without naming them as such. Trust filled the gaps where curiosity might have grown. He trusted her explanations, her silences, her insistence that some things were better left untouched. When friends joked about passion or children, she smiled thinly and changed the subject. I followed her lead. Their marriage did not look like others, but it felt intact, private, protected from outside judgment. At night, he memorized her breathing, the careful rhythm she maintained even in sleep. He told himself this was intimacy deeper than flesh. He did not question the body beside him, because questioning felt like betrayal. Love to him was faith without proof, and for years, faith held. It formed the first rule of their life together. See only what is offered, and nothing more. Looking back, he understood how easily silence became structure. Each unasked question hardened into habit, each compromise into expectation. Their love survived by narrowing, by defining safety through limitation. He mistook her vigilance for delicacy, her control for grace. What he did not see was how these patterns quietly governed them both. Boundaries turned into rules, unspoken but absolute, shaping where they went, whom they saw, and how closely he was allowed to love. By the time he noticed the walls, they already felt necessary. He believed this was marriage maturing. He did not yet realize it was something else entirely, something rehearsed, something enforced, something that would soon demand obedience rather than trust. The rules were forming, invisible, patient, and ready to reveal themselves once the past began pressing forward again.
After years of living by rules, patterns began to show cracks, subtle at first, then harder to ignore. Money left the account in small, irregular amounts, never enough to alarm, always explained before he could ask. Prescriptions appeared folded inside coat pockets, names half obscured, dosage instructions unreadable. She took longer trips, returning exhausted, carrying plastic folders she tucked away without comment. He told himself this was illness. Private suffering demanded privacy. When he offered to go with her, she refused gently, insisting it was easier alone. Her voice carried gratitude and something sharper beneath it, a warning wrapped in affection. He learned to step back, to let love mean distance. The paperwork multiplied: insurance forms, clinic receipts from towns he had met or visited, envelopes addressed to variations of her name. He noticed but did not catalog them, afraid that organization might turn curiosity into accusation. Instead, he cleaned around the piles, respecting their gravity as if they were sacred objects. Her psychological strain worsened. Sleep deserted her. She paced at night, whispering to herself in the kitchen, flinching when he entered. Some mornings she was hollow, staring past him, hands trembling as she poured coffee she did not drink. Other days she clung desperately, afraid he would leave for errands and never return. He became both anchor and guardrail, adjusting his life to stabilize hers. When he asked what hurt her, she spoke of pain that moved through her body unpredictably, of doctors who did not listen, of systems designed to punish difference. She cried when she spoke, tears raw and convincing. He believed her because belief felt kinder than doubt. If love was protection, then questioning her felt like violence. Still, a sense of secrecy grew, thickening the air between them. Phone calls ended abruptly when he entered the room. Mail was intercepted. Passwords changed. Each small concealment came paired with reassurance, kisses pressed too quickly to his cheek, promises that everything would be explained someday. He began suppressing his instincts deliberately. Suspicion, he decided, was a moral failure. Trust was discipline. He practiced it daily, pushing questions aside until they dulled. When fear surfaced, he reminded himself of her fragility, of how easily she shattered when confronted. He did not want to be another force breaking her. Manipulation did not feel like manipulation from the inside. It felt like caretaking. She framed her secrecy as survival, her lies as shields against a world that misunderstood her. He accepted the narrative because it gave him a role he could perform well: protector, husband, safe place. The cousin returned once during this period, more agitated than before. Their conversation happened behind closed doors, voices low and urgent. After he left, she locked herself in the bathroom for hours. When she emerged, her eyes were red but resolved. She told her husband she needed to travel again, soon. That night, he noticed a tremor in his own hands. For the first time, he imagined something happening to her beyond his reach. The thought terrified him more than betrayal. He realized how little he truly knew, how much of their life ran parallel rather than shared. He watched her pack the next morning, careful and methodical, checking documents twice. She kissed him goodbye with unusual intensity, lingering as if memorizing his face. As the door closed behind her, he felt an unfamiliar sensation settle in his chest. Not fear, anticipation. Something was approaching, carried forward by years of silence and compliance. Whatever waited on the other side of her next appointment would not remain contained. The rules were straining, and truth, long deferred, was preparing to force its way into the open. He stood in the doorway long after her car disappeared, aware that obedience had reached its limit. The evidence accumulating in drawers and accounts no longer felt distant. It felt imminent, like a door unlocked, waiting to be opened.
The call came just after dawn, her name breaking through sleep like glass. She had collapsed in a clinic hallway, the nurse said, breathing shallow, unresponsive. He drove without thinking, rules dissolving under urgency. The building smelled of antiseptic and fear. When he reached her bed, she was unconscious, hair plastered to her forehead, lips pale. Machines spoke in steady beeps he did not understand. A doctor asked routine questions that suddenly mattered: allergies, medications, surgical history. He answered what he could, then fell silent. The doctor's eyes lingered, scanning the chart. There was a pause, heavy, deliberate. "There's something you should know," she said, choosing each word like a step across ice. They took him to a small room. Fluorescent lights hummed. A folder lay open on the table, pages thick with stamps and signatures. The doctor explained complications, anatomy, past procedures. The language was clinical, careful, devastating. His wife was biologically male, had been since birth. The surgeries, the hormones, the secrecy suddenly arranged themselves into a brutal clarity. "No," he said softly at first, then louder. "You're wrong." The words sounded childish in the room. The doctor did not argue. She slid a photograph across the table, then another. Records, consent forms, a timeline that stretched back decades, far beyond their vows. When he returned to the bedside, she had regained consciousness. Her eyes found his immediately, sharp with recognition. She tried to speak. He raised a hand, not in anger yet, but in disbelief. "Is it true?" he asked. The question fractured the air. She nodded once, tears spilling before words could follow. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I loved you." The phrases landed wrong, out of order. He stared at her face, searching for the woman he knew, the one he had built a life around. Grief surged first, a sudden mourning for a marriage he realized had never fully existed. Then confusion, then something hotter, meaner. He thought of the darkness, the doctors avoided, the trips alone, the rules. They rearranged themselves into intention. Deception no longer felt passive. It felt engineered. He stepped back from the bed as if from a ledge. 30 years, he said. "You let me believe." He could not finish. The words refused to cooperate. She reached for him. He flinched. The movement surprised them both. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I thought if you knew you'd leave, or worse." Her fear was naked now, stripped of strategy. It did not soften him. Everything he believed about himself shook. Husband, man, protector. Each role cracked under the weight of the revelation. He felt watched by the past, mocked by memory. Moments he had cherished curdled. Intimacy recast as performance. Rage arrived last, cold and precise, settling behind his eyes. The doctor returned, speaking of stabilization and consent. He signed forms without reading. When they were alone again, silence pressed in, suffocating. She tried once more. "Please," she said. He did not answer. He was no longer sure what she was asking for. As night fell, the machines kept time, indifferent. He sat rigid in the chair, staring at his hands, seeing them as strangers. Somewhere between the beeping and her shallow breaths, he understood that knowledge could not be undone. The truth had crossed a line it could never return from. Whatever happened next would not be governed by rules or patience. It would be governed by fracture, by choice, by a reckoning neither of them could stop.
He felt the room shrink around them, walls leaning closer with every breath. Love did not disappear. It inverted, turning sharp, accusatory. I imagined conversations, confrontations, future splitting. The night stretched, taut with unsaid things. When he finally stood, he knew trust had transformed into something volatile, something that would demand answers immediately, regardless of the damage it caused. By morning, the balance of power would be tested.
A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. Morning came without relief. He had not slept. He had listened. The machines, her breathing, the low murmur of nurses formed a rhythm that tightened his thoughts into loops. When she woke fully, she spoke first, voice hoarse, urgent, afraid. She told him about survival, about a world that punished honesty, about the cost of being seen. She said love was the only place she had ever been safe. She explained years in fragments, the surgeries, the names changed, the documents carried like talismans. She spoke of violence narrowly avoided, of family who helped then vanished, of doctors who demanded silence as the price of care. Every sentence asked him to understand that secrecy had been oxygen. If you had known, she said, you would have been in danger too. He heard manipulation where he once heard vulnerability. Each justification felt like a net tightening around his memory. He thought of vows spoken plainly, of faith offered without conditions. Now conditions multiplied, retroactively attaching themselves to every tender moment. Power shifted as he withdrew, and she reached. He controlled the room by refusing to answer, by letting silence bruise. Something inside him hardened. He felt deceived, stripped, mocked by the years he had defended her boundaries. Emasculation crept in quietly, poisoning his sense of self. He imagined how others would see him, what jokes would be made, what questions would never stop. The thought was unbearable. He began to patrol his own mind, searching for evidence of weakness, of complicity. His narration turned sharp. He replayed scenes obsessively, correcting them, punishing himself for kindness. The darkness in the bedroom became a conspiracy. The rules became traps. He wondered who else knew, who had laughed privately while he performed a marriage built on a mission. Paranoia grew legs and walked the corridors of the hospital with him. She begged him not to leave. Please, she said again, reaching. He stepped back. You used me, he said, surprising himself with the certainty of it. The words felt powerful. She shook her head, crying, insisting love was real. He could not reconcile love with strategy. In his mind, affection turned into threat, intimacy into leverage. Anger surged, then crashed into grief. He mourned a life he could no longer claim as authentic. He felt watched by nurses, by the chart, by the idea of public exposure. Every whisper sounded like judgment. He began to imagine outcomes, confrontations, ways this truth might spread. Control became his only remaining comfort. By evening, his thoughts circled a single demand. Answers, total and immediate. He needed her to confess everything, to itemize the deception until it felt contained. When she hesitated, exhausted, he interpreted it as further proof. Suspicion replaced patience. He no longer saw a partner recovering from collapse, but a threat recovering strength. The room felt smaller, the beeping faster. He realized he could not coexist with uncertainty. Love had inverted into vigilance, tenderness into surveillance. As he stood to leave, he felt something irreversible settle into place. Whatever came next would not be negotiated. It would be decided. He walked the hallway until the exit sign blurred, rehearsing sentences that sounded like verdicts. Outside, dusk thickened, and his phone vibrated with messages he did not read. He imagined the house, the drawers, the folders, the rules waiting to be enforced. Images intruded, unwanted and precise, of doors closing, of metal cold against skin. He recoiled from them, then returned, ashamed of the relief they promised. When he went back to the room, she slept, sedated, smaller than memory. He watched her chest rise and fall, and felt nothing steady. Love did not return. It reorganized, becoming a calculation of risk. He decided he would hear everything, tonight if possible. No more postponement, no more mercy that required ignorance. He leaned close and whispered her name, not to wake her, but to test himself. The sound felt foreign. He straightened, resolved, and called for the nurse, asking when she would be alert. The answer mattered more than he admitted. Time, he understood, was now an enemy. If the truth delayed him any longer, it would choose for him.
The night was coming, and with it,
A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. Night settled like a held breath. He brought her home after discharge, the drive silent, streetlights flickering across her face like interrogations. Inside the house, the rules waited, intact and accusing. He locked the door, turned the lights low, and felt the walls close in. She moved carefully, weakened, watching him for cues he no longer offered. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Papers lay between them, pulled from drawers, arranged without care. He asked for everything: dates, names, procedures. She tried to answer, voice breaking, stopping to breathe through pain. Words failed them both. Each explanation sounded rehearsed, each apology insufficient. He felt his selfhood buckle, a man unmoored from the story he had told himself for decades. "You never trusted me," he said. The sentence landed heavier than he expected. She shook her head, whispering that trust was what had kept her alive. The contradiction enraged him. Survival felt like an accusation. He paced, counting steps, touching counters, grounding himself in objects that still obeyed him. Time lost shape. Arguments rose and collapsed into silence. He imagined neighbors sleeping, unaware. He imagined laughter, exposure, ridicule. His thoughts narrowed, tunneling towards certainty. Control, he decided, was the only language left. He went to the bedroom and opened the safe he had installed years earlier, a precaution that now felt prophetic. When he returned, the gun remained down at his side. She saw it and froze. "Please," she said, standing slowly, hands open. He did not raise his voice. He asked one final question, simple and absolute. She answered honestly. The truth struck him with a physical force he could not absorb. His sense of self imploded. Past and present collapsed together, erasing boundaries. He felt small, exposed, undone. The shot was not planned. It arrived as a reflex, a rupture. Sound shattered the room, then vanished. She fell without drama, a sudden absence where a person had been. He stood over her, stunned by the quiet. The gun felt unreal in his hand, heavier than physics allowed. Blood spread, dark and deliberate, marking the floor he had polished for years. He waited for something to happen, for reversal, for meaning. Nothing came. Silence thickened, pressing against his ears until it roared. He set the gun down carefully, aligning it with the table edge. He touched her shoulder once, then withdrew, as if contact might undo him further. The house absorbed the moment without protest. Minutes passed, or hours, he could not tell. He thought of rules, of love, of the night he first promised protection. None of it connected anymore. The act stood alone, irreversible and mute. When he finally called emergency services, his voice sounded distant, practiced. He described what he had done without ornament or excuse. As sirens approached, blue light bleeding through curtains, he sat beside the body and waited. The silence did not lift. It deepened, settling into him, preparing him for what would come next, when others would enter and begin giving this night a name. He noticed details with cruel clarity, a cracked tile near the sink, the hum of the refrigerator, the clock advancing without permission. He replayed the moment again and again, not to savor it, but to locate the instant where choice might have diverted fate. Each replay failed. The failure felt instructional. He understood, dimly, that witnesses would come, that language would be imposed on what had happened, turning collapse into categories. He feared the words more than the consequences. Murder, hate, deception. None fit cleanly, yet all hovered. He washed his hands and watched the water cloud pink, then clear. The act felt ceremonial, not cleansing. He changed his shirt, folded the stained one, and set it aside as if order could still be negotiated. Sitting again, he listened for her breath and hated himself for expecting it. When the sirens grew louder, he did not stand. He remained still, practicing stillness, surrendering momentum. This night, he realized, would fracture into many nights, each examined, replayed, contested. The gun lay where he left it, patient. Outside, the first knock came, firm and final. He closed his eyes, counting breaths, judgment gathering beyond the door. A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. Blue lights washed the house clean of privacy. Officers entered with practiced calm, voices low, movements efficient. He sat where he had waited, hands visible, eyes dry. They asked his name, her name, the time. He answered without elaboration, watching notebooks open like mouths. The body became evidence. Photographs replaced memory. A detective knelt, noting distance, angle, blood pattern. Another asked about the gun, ownership, storage. He explained the safe, the years, the reason that now sounded foolish. Words felt dangerous. Each one could be turned. At the station, hours blurred. A lawyer appeared, then left. Questions circled identity, motive, history. Was there fraud? Did he fear for his life? Did he act in panic? He felt them searching for a category sturdy enough to hold the act, none fit without strain. Media arrived before clarity. Headlines hedged, then hardened. Marriage of decades ends in shooting. Secrets revealed. Outrage followed confusion. Commentators argued over language, pronouns, intent. He watched clips on a muted television, recognizing nothing. His face became a symbol he did not choose. Investigators pressed gently, then firmly. Who knew? When did he learn? Why did he bring her home? He tried to control the narrative, insisting on shock, betrayal, collapse. He avoided words that sounded like hatred, words that sounded like mercy. Control slipped anyway, leaking through omissions. Advocates gathered on opposite sides of the courthouse steps. Some demanded recognition of violence rooted in identity. Others insisted deception justified fear. The law lagged behind the noise, cautious, procedural. Justice moved slowly, weighted by discomfort. In interviews, he corrected small details, clinging to precision as proof of honesty. He emphasized love, routine, devotion. He minimized rage. The more he spoke, the less coherent the story became. Truth fractured under competing frames. At night in holding, he rehearsed testimony, trimming emotion, sharpening logic. He imagined jurors' faces, their recoil, their sympathy. He could not predict which version of him would survive scrutiny. He slept in snatches, waking to the echo of sirens that were no longer there. Charges came with neutral language: homicide, firearm, aggravating factors to be determined. The phrase felt like a verdict postponed, a vacuum awaiting meaning. He signed papers and felt history condense into checkboxes. Outside, the conversation raged. Inside, he learned the cost of being legible. Every identity demanded translation. Every translation risked distortion. He sensed the trial would not simply ask what he did, but who he was allowed to be when he did it. As weeks passed, evidence stacked neatly, timelines aligned, experts prepared to explain bodies, minds, fear. He realized the night would be retold by strangers until it no longer belonged to him. The silence he had practiced was gone, replaced by argument. When he was led to court for the first time, cameras clicked like insects. He kept his eyes forward, gripping restraint as discipline. The case had a name now, even if no one agreed on it. Soon he would hear his marriage reduced to exhibits, his motives measured, his words weighed against hers. The process had begun, inexorable, pulling him toward a room where the past would be spoken aloud and judged. He wondered how language would pin him down, how testimony would carve a motive he barely recognized. In the interim hearings, he listened as attorneys tested phrases, trading certainty for leverage. He felt reduced to angles and timelines, while her life expanded into context he could not control. Each filing sharpened stakes, each delay prolonged exposure. He learned the calendar of justice, the waiting rooms, the weight of benches. Strangers speculated freely, projecting fears and beliefs on the file number that was now him. He kept notes he never shared, a private map of memory meant to preserve nuance. Yet nuance kept dissolving under pressure. As the date for trial approached, he sensed the narrative hardening, cooling into something formal and severe. The question was no longer only what happened, but what it meant. He would soon face voices prepared to decide that meaning for him. The courtroom loomed as an arena of translation, where silence would be punished and speech could condemn. He inhaled, bracing for the next phase, knowing the story would move. A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. The courtroom felt smaller than he expected, airless despite its height. He took his seat while names were read, charges restated, the marriage reduced to dates. The judge's voice smoothed everything into procedure. When testimony began, their life was dismantled carefully, piece by piece, as if it could be rebuilt differently if arranged correctly. Medical experts spoke first. They explained anatomy, hormones, surgeries, timelines. Diagrams replaced intimacy. The language was precise, impersonal, yet devastating. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing facts that stripped secrecy of its romance and pain of its privacy. He watched faces register surprise, discomfort, sympathy, sometimes all at once. Acquaintances followed. Neighbors described quiet dinners, polite waves, a couple without drama. Friends remembered her gentleness, her reserve. Someone mentioned the darkness, the canceled appointments, the travel alone. Each recollection added texture he had ignored. None accused him directly. None absolved him either. Letters were entered into evidence, handwriting enlarged on screens. She wrote of fear and endurance, of love practiced as caution. She thanked him for safety he never realized he provided. Hearing her words aloud, spoken by another voice, unsettled him. Humanity surfaced late, undeniable and fragile. He felt the room tilt toward her, and something in his chest collapsed. When it was his turn, he stood slowly. He spoke of routine, trust, rules that felt mutual until they weren't. He admitted anger without defending it, shock without theatrics. Under questioning, his thoughts scattered. He contradicted himself, corrected details, returned to phrases that sounded safer. The jury saw not a monster, but a man splintered by revelation. Cross-examination pressed harder. Why bring her home? Why retrieve the gun? Why not leave? He answered honestly, and honesty sounded irrational. He described fear of exposure, loss of self, collapse. The words embarrassed him even as they rang true. He watched jurors exchange looks, weighing instability against intent. Experts testified about trauma, identity stress, cognitive narrowing under shock. They spoke of moral injury and catastrophic thinking. The prosecution countered with responsibility, with choices made and time taken. Both were right in different measures. The truth refused to settle. Throughout, he avoided her photograph displayed near the bench. When he finally looked, he recognized the woman he loved, not the categories imposed on her. Grief arrived late, heavy and humiliating. He wondered if acknowledging it sooner would have changed anything. Closing arguments tried to resolve contradiction. Justice demanded clarity. The marriage resisted it. When the jury retired, the room exhaled, exhausted. He sat alone, hands folded, listening to the echo of a life retold by others. The verdict returned without drama. Words felt like weights, guilt tempered by consideration, sentencing deferred. There was no release in the outcome, only a sense of narrowing, of paths closing. As he was led away, he understood that judgment had not ended the story. It had merely fixed a frame around it. In the hours that followed, paperwork replaced voices, bailiffs directed movement, attorneys spoke softly about options, appeals, time. He nodded without absorbing meaning. His body carried him forward while his mind lagged behind, replaying testimony, searching for a sentence that could have shifted valence. None appeared. The trial had translated their marriage into evidence, and evidence had chosen its shape. A guard paused him at a door, checking restraints, offering water. The gesture felt absurdly kind. He drank, handshaking, realizing kindness now arrived only through systems, never intimacy. The realization stung more than the verdict itself. In the hallway, voices discussed meaning. Inside, he felt emptied, stripped of defenses. He knew the next chapter would not be about facts, but consequences. Justice had spoken, but its cost was still accruing, measured in years, in memory, in the quiet aftermath where truth lingered without comfort. He lowered his head and walked forward, carrying a verdict that explained everything and nothing. The weight followed him, unresolved, in corridors that promised no mercy ahead whatsoever.
A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. Verdict and sentencing arrived without ceremony, the courtroom subdued after the jury's return. The judge spoke evenly, acknowledging complexity while imposing years measured and finite. He listened, hands folded, waiting for feeling that never came. There was no vindication, no thunder, only a dull accounting of consequences read into record. Outside, cameras gathered like weather. Analysts debated intent, language, motive. Some called the sentence lenient, others excessive. The divide widened, cutting across belief lines he had never learned to name. He watched from a hallway monitor, volume muted, understanding that justice was becoming commentary, his marriage an argument people used to prove themselves right. Sentencing paperwork followed. Dates, conditions, transport. His lawyer explained appeals, probabilities, time. He nodded, grateful for clarity that required nothing from him. In the gallery, a few faces wept. Others stared ahead, impassive. Her photograph remained near the bench, an image pressed flat by procedure. The judge paused, then addressed the room. Truth, he said, has been established. The word landed wrong. Truth, he knew, had not been kind, nor gradual. It had arrived like a blow, leaving damage no sentence could repair. Mercy was not promised, order was. Afterward, advocates spoke into microphones. Some demanded reform, others restraint. Identity hovered over every statement, a presence alternately invoked and avoided. He felt the cost of visibility, how lives fracture when categories harden faster than understanding. The truth, concealed too long, then exposed at once, had scorched everyone it touched. Transport came quietly. Shackles checked, story archived, searchable, incomplete. Justice felt finished and unfinished at once. In the holding area, he sat alone, absorbing the shape of years ahead. The sentence named a duration, not a meaning. He understood now that truth does not heal. It clarifies, then recedes. What remained was living with what clarity demands. Public opinion would continue, loud and unresolved. His part was quieter, to submit, to endure, to carry memory without correction. As guards escorted him, he felt the corridor lengthen, time stretching into habit. Ahead waited confinement, routine, reflection. He thought of her letters, her fear. The night truth arrived too fast. He wondered whether earlier honesty would have saved them, or merely changed the shape of loss. The question followed him as the final door opened. Inside, processing began. Names, numbers, property. The system translated him into intake. He complied, feeling the verdict settle into routine. Truth had spoken, mercy had not. The cost was time, attention, a life narrowed. That night, in a cell lit too brightly, he lay awake listening to keys. He accepted incompleteness as permanent. Justice he saw had done its work, and left the rest to years. Tomorrow would begin the long after, where truth offers no comfort, only endurance, and memory asks to be carried without relief, step by measured step. He closed his eyes, breathing evenly, knowing reflection would come later, when days learned his name. For now, the sentence stood, quiet, sufficient, insufficient, a boundary he would inhabit. Beyond it, time waited, patient, preparing him for the solitude where questions return without witnesses, and answers refused to settle, carrying him toward years that would ask nothing but survival, and nights that would reopen memory, gently, relentlessly, until truth became habit, not mercy. He sensed the future narrowing, not as punishment but as consequence, and stepped forward, carrying the quiet burden of clarity into time, where living would finish the sentence courts could not, alone, slowly, completely.
A calm, clear female voice with a slightly breathy and warm tone, mid-range pitch, and precise articulation, suitable for narration. Years passed measured by counts and keys. Confinement taught him new routines, stripped of choice but rich in time. He learned the sounds of the unit, the schedules, the quiet negotiations of survival. At night, when lights dimmed, memory returned with discipline, replaying love as it had been, not as it was named in court. He remembered mornings at the table, her careful hands, the way safety felt mutual. Those memories hurt more than the verdict because they remained believable. Guilt threaded through them, a second voice asking where vigilance should have begun. He carried it without relief, knowing remorse could not resurrect what truth had undone. Letters arrived occasionally from strangers, some furious, some tender. He read them once, then folded them away. Identity debates continued beyond the walls, but inside, questions simplified. What did I fear? What did I love? The answers changed, depending on the hour. He took classes, worked shifts, kept his head down. He avoided mirrors, not from shame, but from curiosity about the man reflected there. He was older now, quieter, less certain of categories. The self that had demanded control felt distant, like a language he once spoke fluently and now barely recognized. On anniversaries, he allowed himself to grieve openly, not only for her death, but for the marriage as a living thing. He mourned the rules that had masqueraded as care, the silence he had called devotion. He mourned his own fear, which had learned to speak through anger. Sometimes he imagined alternate nights, doors left open, words spoken earlier, departures without violence. The images comforted and condemned him equally. Responsibility did not loosen with time, it clarified. He accepted that explanation was not absolution. In the yard, he watched seasons turn. Change happened without asking permission. He wondered whether truth always demanded spectacle, whether mercy could exist alongside honesty. The question followed him, persistent and unresolved. When asked to summarize his case for a review board, he spoke plainly. He did not argue innocence. He described collapse, not hatred, panic, not planning. Whether they believed him mattered less than the act of saying it without disguise. At night, before sleep, he addressed her silently,
apologizing without expectation. Love survived as memory and as weight, inseparable. He no longer sought forgiveness, he sought understanding, even if it never arrived. He learned to listen more than speak. Stories circulated on the tier, confessions traded for cigarettes, bravado masking regret. He kept his own story small, careful not to sharpen it into legend. Counselors asked about anger, about beliefs, about accountability. He answered slowly, choosing verbs that did not excuse him. In writing exercises, he named fear as the constant, a current beneath love, beneath duty, beneath pride, shaping reactions he once mistook for strength. The admission steadied him, not because it absolved, but because he named the driver he had ignored for decades and acknowledged the damage without bargaining for sympathy ever. The years taught him this: truth is not a cure. It reveals, then withdraws, leaving consequences to be lived. As he lay listening to keys and footsteps, he returned to the question that had no sentence to end it. Was the crime born from deception or from the fear of seeing it? He closed his eyes, letting the question remain.